We're going to change things up a little bit today. Instead of a written article in the 100 Days of Cyber Challenge, I believe this is day 19. We're going to do a video instead where we go through, do a little bit of hands-on, go over a couple of Linux commands. Linux is something that I think maybe gets a little hyped too much in cybersecurity discussions. And in, you'll see it on social media and posts and things like that. And there's a sentiment that goes around that I don't really like, and that is that if you are not strong in Linux or Linux centric, you're less of a cybersecurity professional than if you're, say, Microsoft centric. And that's just not true. You use the tools that you need for your job. So if you're in a more of a Microsoft environment, you may very well not need to know any Linux at all. And who's to say that you're less of a cybersecurity professional because of that? So I'm not going to get into a religious discussion or support anyone that does get into religious discussions where you say Linux user bad or Linux user good, Microsoft user bad. I'm not going to support that kind of discussion. It's just not true. But that said, a lot of pen testing tools out there are Linux based. Um, I used a flavor of Linux to repurpose an old Windows machine into a router. So it is useful. It is out there. It is used a lot. And it is useful to know if you want to do it. So set aside the religious discussions now and let's get into Linux now. I've set up WSL on my computer, which is the Windows subsystem for Linux. I have the Debian edition. Debian is a very long-lived and very stable version of Linux. I like to use it as a learning tool and as a teaching tool. And it's kind of my personal opinion, but I think something that's as stable and as widely distributed and has been around a long while is probably the best platform to learn from. If you were following along on Ubuntu, I think that would be also okay. It's widely used. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I'm using Debian, and the first thing we're going to look at is we're in a command line kind of environment. So if you were running just a regular Linux machine, you would run a terminal session and you would get a prompt that's something like this. This is not the custom or the default prompt that comes with the distro. I customize this. And I don't want to get into any coverage on how you change your prompt. I'll let that be an exercise for you, the viewer, to learn on your own. I think it's a good starting place. It's a good way to get familiar with the Linux environment, figure out how that prompt can be reconfigured. By default, I'm logged into this as Techie, Techie, but I've changed the prompt to say Rofatech at Debian. So if I had been using the default configuration, it would say Techie at machine name, and you'd have this colon and then the stuff that comes after it. Okay. I just chose to do it this way, customize it this way, but just keep in mind I'm actually logged in as Techie, Techie, and we're going to see that name come up when we start looking at files and directories. So that's the user at the machine name. We have a colon as kind of a separator. This tilde means something. It is the home folder for Rofatech, the user. So every user is going to have their home folder, and it's kind of a starting point. Directories are a whole another discussion all to themselves and what they mean. So it's kind of beyond the scope of this introductory lesson to go over that. The dollar sign is just, to me, it's a separator. Um, let's go ahead and enter some commands. And we'll start out with what I call the list command. I've seen it called other things, but we just type ls. This is a lot like the dir command in Windows or DOS prompt, the command line, what's it called? CMD command prompt, I think. in Windows. Anyway, we do ls, we type it, we get nothing. And that's because it's empty. So let's change that. Let's add something to it. We will add a directory. We're going to make a directory and we're going to call it test because we're very creative in our name. And no errors. So it looks like that took. Let's go ahead and do another list. And indeed, test does appear. It's blue. So that appears to be a kind of a color code convention for directories or folders. Well, I'll call them directories. Let's go ahead and look at this in a little greater detail. We can take the ls command and do a -l to get more details. There's a lot of information here, but I'm going to just focus on the D and these letters here. The rest of them, there's about 10 letters here. D means directory. So test is a directory. If it was not a directory, it would be a file. Files would be indicated by a dash in this position. So it's either a directory or it's not a directory. There are 3 letters here that are important, the next 3. The RW and the X means read, write, and execute, and it has to do with the owner of that item. So the owner of that item is Techie. That's me. I logged in. I created test. I own it. So I have read, write, and execute permissions. If I don't have one of those 3 permissions, that letter, the corresponding letter would be replaced by a dash. And we'll see that in a second. But as you would expect, the person who created the item, assuming they have the right to do that, would have R, W, and X as their permissions. We go now to the next group of 3, and we see that there are no write permissions, but there are read permissions and there are execute permissions. That has to do with the group. So for the group, in groups, we're not going to get too much into user security just yet, at least not in this video. I want this video to be fairly brief. But just keep in mind that there will be group rights to a file, and you can set up your users and you can set up your groups. That's a more advanced aspect of admin. The last 3 letters have to do with other users. So if it's not the owner or the main user, and if it's not the group, somebody in the group, then these last 3 letters apply to them, and they have read and execute permissions, but no write. That's just everybody else. Let's go ahead and get into the test directory. Change directory CD to test. And as you can see by our prompt, test shows up in the name. Let's go ahead and it's probably a waste of time, but just for kicks and giggles, nothing shows up. We try to list that directory. We just created it, so of course there's nothing in it. Let's change that. First of all, let's type the word nano correctly, and then let's create a file using the Nano text editor. Nano sample.txt. This is going to run a very basic text editor that comes with, as far as I know, it comes with every Linux distribution, but I haven't seen one where it doesn't, but that doesn't mean there isn't one out there. I don't claim to know all the Linux distros. It's a very basic text editor. It's not the most user-friendly. If you're used to point and click and menus and things like that, it's not going to have any of that stuff. A lot of very, very keyboard-centric in its workings. I'm going to type in some basic text, just say this is a sample, I cannot spell to save my life. This is a sample text file. Goodness. All right, that's a sample text file. We hit Control X. We can see by the command in the lower left, that kind of character in the X means Control X. That is our command to exit. but because changes have been made, it's going to ask if you want to save them. And I would just key in the Y for yes, I want to save it. And write to file, let's just leave the default up there, sample.txt. We opened it under that name, we might as well just leave it. I could conceivably change it now, but there's no need to do that. Let's just go with that. And let's take a look at our directory. Sample.txt appears. That's no surprise. Let's look at it in detail. And we see, looking at the letters, I'm not going to look at the other stuff that's on there. It's a dash because it's in the first position because that's a file. The next three letters are R, W, but no X. So there is no execute, but there are read and write permissions for Techie, creator of the file. The group has read-only access. There's no write or execute, and all other users have read-only access. Again, no write or execute. When you look in these folders or these directories, you don't want to see a lot of RWX, RWX, RWX. Because what that means is that you've given every user unlimited access rights to that file. And it's not a very secure way to operate. Employees get frustrated, they get mad, they get terminated. Maybe some of them come on with bad intentions in the first place, but if we're being very cautious about our security, we have to be a little pessimistic about it and assume that there are people out there to do destructive things. We don't want to set every file to have permissions for all users in the company or in the organization that we're in. So you don't want to see a lot of RWX, RWX, RWX. I don't know how often it happens. Um, and I don't want to talk anecdotally about data about security breaches and all that, but I would imagine that there probably are some security breaches or a sizable number of them where the permissions are just misconfigured. And it would be very easy for somebody who has access to that system to um, you could alter files or you could even delete them and sabotage a company's operations if they depend on those files. So part of the first step of tightening down security is to get these permissions right for the right user. And just intuitively, if you had a group of developers that are writing code, um, you might let the developers have RWX, have full access to those files in that directory, but you might, on the other hand, not let an accountant have it. Maybe an accountant needs to look at it for QA purposes. I don't know. I can't see that. But maybe you have a QA person who wants to look at it and look for possible errors or bugs or something like that. You would let them read it, but you wouldn't let them modify it or execute it. So everybody has their role, and we use a concept called least privilege. If you don't need a certain privilege to do your task, then we don't give you more privileges than what you need. That limits the damage when people get fired or leave the company, and we worry about files being deleted or damaged inadvertently or intentionally. We don't want anything to be damaged or um, deleted because we gave too much permission. All right. So with all that in mind, another thing I want to show is we can look at the contents of sample.txt with the cat command. And of course, we see that what we saved in Nano earlier shows up. This is a sample text file. No surprise there. That's really helpful. I don't have it set up right now, but there is a command called man, kind of the manual. So you can type man followed by the command name. So for example, I might say man cat, and it would show you help for the cat command. I have not properly set up man in this Debian environment, so that command is not found. I beyond the scope of this video to set that up, but one of the things we can do for the time being is we can say or I'm sorry, say cat dash dash help. And it gives me the options on my commands. So if this takes up more than one screen, you can use your arrow keys to scroll up and down and go back and look at the where the content starts. But this is a very helpful thing for keying in your commands if you're not sure what switch or what command line option to use. That's how you find out about it. If you have man set up, then you can do that too. Man plus the name of the command, and it will give you information like this to tell you how to set up your command line options. I don't have anything else to add. I think I'm going to end it right there. Um, Thanks again for following along. Encourage you to play around with these commands, look at these different options that are available for them, and see what you can do with them. See what you can do with different ways to list files, and look at different ways maybe that you could run the cat command. Um, there are certainly other options, for making directories and things like that. So look at what your other options are that I haven't covered here and play around with it and learn more than you knew before. Thanks again.